Hello, I'm back. I'm so glad to see everyone. I'm so glad to be here tonight. I've missed y'all the last couple weeks. Did everybody have fun on spring break? Kinda, sorta. I know that Megan and William said they had a lot of stuff going on with y'all this week, or some of you, and I'm so glad. I was out of town. We went to San Antonio, went to Six Flags, Fiesta, Texas, which I wish that would move here because I think it's way better than our Six Flags, personally. Personal opinion here. SeaWorld, Alamo, we did like all the touristy stuff. And we hiked Enchanted Rock. It was so fun. But I'm so glad to be back. I'm glad to be here with you guys. We're going to have a good night. If I haven't met you, my name is Tisha. I'm the student pastor here at the Frisco East Campus. And this is what I've been thinking a lot about the last week. And you can ask anybody on my team because I've said it a lot. Like I would say a million times, but that's a gross exaggeration. But for those of you in this room and you're seniors, like you have 9 weeks left. 9 weeks. And I just keep thinking, like, I've been your youth pastor. If you've been coming the whole time I've been the youth pastor here, I've been your youth pastor for 2 years. And I just keep thinking, like, I hope that what you have felt here and what you've learned here, not necessarily from me, because I'm not like the be-all, end-all, but I hope that it has grown your faith. And I hope over the next 9 weeks, my challenge, my prayer for you, and really everyone in this room, but specifically for seniors, is that you take these 9 weeks that I know are crazy because it's the end of the year and there's a lot of stuff going on, but that you take these 9 weeks to really make sure that your faith is rooted in the Lord, in God, in His Word. And that, because if you leave here and you go to college and it's not, I'm telling you, the enemy, he is going to try really hard to tear you away from God's purpose for your life. And honestly, I see it every year, and it's a shame. It's a shame. And I think that when our relationship, when our faith in the Lord is grounded on who He is because we're intentional, being intentional, which part of that is coming on Wednesday nights, and I'm so thankful that you're here, but part of that is you on your own developing your own personal life with Jesus. It's so important. And so over the next 9 weeks, I don't know what this means. I'll be really honest with you. I've been talking to my team a little bit about what can we do to make sure that these next 9 weeks are as fruitful, as fulfilling, as hope-filled, as challenging as they can be. Because when the summer hits and we don't have Hope students over the summer, which we have camp, you should totally go, that you will continue to build your faith on your own. So when we come back, not our seniors, sadly, but when the rest of us come back in August, that our faith will just be built. Not necessarily because of what happens in this room, but because of the God that we serve when we're in this room. But He's not just in this room. He's with us when we walk out. He's with us in our house, in our homes, at our jobs, when we're traveling in the summer, when we're at our school. He's with us. And He desperately, listen, I am so off my notes and on a tangent right now. But this, I feel like, is a pastor moment that I wanted to share this with you. That our faith is built because of the effort that we put in. It's easy to come on Wednesday nights, honestly. But man, the real challenge is day to day. Are you working on your faith? Are you working on your relationship with the Lord? So, all right, done with that. I did want to say hi to 2 friends, Austin and Caitlin. Hi, guys. I'm so glad you're here. We went on a missions trip to Nashville a few years ago, and it's been a little while since I've seen y'all, so I'm glad you're here. Okay. We are starting a new series this week called The Rally. The Rally, and as you could tell from all the sports stuff, which I'm not like a sportsy type girl all the time. I do like sports. I used to play softball. I was first base, and I was pretty good, but probably I'm terrible now because I haven't done it in years and years. But I love doing it. It's called The Rally, and we are looking at today a specific person who in the Bible we saw him rally. Now, everybody loves a good comeback story, right? I mean, I think so. When it feels like you are in the depths of this is not going to happen, the win is not going to happen, what we want to happen is not going to happen, long hair problems, it's not going to happen, and then all of a sudden, everything changes, right? And there's a complete shift. So Maybe some of you know this story. I honestly, this is the one I'm the least familiar with, but people on our team know this story, and so you probably know it too. But in 2006, there was, in the NCAA, there was a team named George Mason, the Patriots. Anybody know this? Not really. Some. Yes, thank you. Okay. They were like terrible. They were terrible, terrible. People didn't even know if they would make it in like to the semifinals because they were like just awful. There was so much skepticism around them, but they ended up getting the 11th seed, so they got in, and they ended up literally beating all of these teams that were so much better than them. Michigan State, North Carolina, Connecticut, and they were on their way to the Final Four. They didn't win NCAA, but it was like the greatest comeback story, and people were just like, could not believe it. It was insane. It's one of the biggest comeback stories in basketball, so I've heard. Another one, I do know this one, Michael Jordan. Anybody know him? He's kind of a guy that plays basketball. He's really cool. Okay, like literally the legend, Michael Jordan. I do know him, I promise. Many of you probably know this. You're probably more familiar with this story, but Michael Jordan, when he was in high school, he got put on the JV team because they said he wasn't tall enough to play in the varsity. Can you believe that? Like literally, arguably the greatest player of all time, but like really, really close. I don't know how you stand on it. Honestly, he probably is, but I don't know enough about basketball to really say that. But he said this, and I love this quote that he said about failures. He says, "I have missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I have lost almost 300 games. I have failed over and over and over again in my life. And honestly, that's why I've succeeded." I love that, because he didn't look at all those failures as like kicking himself and like, I can't believe I didn't do it. This is the worst. I'm a terrible player. No, he rose out of these challenges and became literally one of the greatest players of all time. Maybe you're in this room, you're not a sports fan, totally get that. Maybe you're more like me, fully admit it, kind of a nerdy type, you love to read. Maybe you guys have heard of a little someone, her name is J.K. Rowling. Anybody heard of her? Yes, thank you, a few. Okay, good. Listen, I'll tell you this. I didn't know this before this message, but J.K. Rowling, did you know that she was like a struggling single mom that could barely put food on the table before she wrote this series? Like, she could not even put food on the table. And I just read that and I just thought, man, one of a very notable writer, someone who is incredible, like, she became one of these influential people in the book world, in the literary world, if you will, once she put pen to paper and wrote this great series called Harry Potter, which I love. But I didn't know if you know this or not, her manuscript was rejected 12 times before someone actually took it and published it, and then became like what it is today. I think the point of a lot of these stories, and so many stories that you may know and maybe you've even experienced before, and probably everybody in this room could tell a story of a great comeback, whether it's in your personal life or whether it's something that you've heard. I think one of the greatest things is that when the story feels so bleak, and yet you see someone who literally rises from the ashes, and they don't let all of these hard things, these tough things, these 1-2 punches, they don't let them keep them down, but they get back up and they keep going and they rally. Put their rally cap on and they keep going and they keep moving forward. And many times we see massive victories when those happens. So over the next few weeks, next 3 weeks, we have this series called The Rally, and Pastor John does this all the time. You've probably heard him do that if you come on the weekends, but he always tells you what we're doing for weeks. So week 1, this week, we're talking about rallying when we feel persecuted, or rally when persecuted. Week 2, rallying through pain, or week 3, rallying because of Jesus' forgiveness. I would imagine that there are a lot of people in this room who feel a little beat down. That maybe the last few weeks, the last few months, the last year or so, you have never felt lower in your life. That you've felt like it's been very hard, it's been very difficult. You didn't know if you were going to be able to pick yourself up off of whatever ground you're laying on and keep moving forward. You've felt like you were in the depths of despair. And I think maybe you've been wrestling with this tension because you've been continuing, hopefully, to love Jesus and like walk out your faith with him, but also like maybe it's felt really, really hard. Or maybe you've been at school or you've shared something online or something along those lines and you felt persecuted because of what you believe. Maybe you're a strong Christian, you live and breathe Jesus, you spend time with him, I hope so. Like that is your life, and you've maybe shared something, which I don't know, I don't love social media for that reason because everyone has their own opinions, everyone can write whatever they want to write. I'm like more of a face-to-face kind of girl, but like maybe you felt persecuted, maybe you've stood up for something at school and you've literally felt persecuted because of something that you've said or something that you've believed or something that you've shared. So my question, like the question hopefully that we answer tonight, a couple of them, how do I keep moving forward in God's purpose when I feel like, I'm being made fun of for what I believe? How do I keep pressing forward in God's purpose when I feel rejected and not accepted? How do I keep going when I always feel like when I share my faith, people are turning their back on me and rejecting me? I don't know if there's like this really big be-all, end-all answer to this question, but we're going to look at someone in the Bible who was persecuted for what he believed. And I hope that at the end of this night that you feel a little more encouraged, that you feel a little more like that you can rally if persecution does come your way. Because I will tell you that someone who's been a Christ follower for most of her life, that there are times when I've shared things about my faith that people just have not accepted, and they haven't believed, and they've wanted to argue with me and fight with me, or maybe they haven't wanted to be my friend anymore because maybe I've stated something that I really firmly believe the Bible is saying, because that's where my truth comes from, is from the Bible, and they don't see that truth, or maybe they haven't read the Bible, so they don't believe in that truth, and I've felt dejected from them. I've lost friends over it, not because I'm a fighter, because I don't really like to fight, but man, sometimes when you are talking through something with someone in grace and love, like you do have to speak the truth in love. But hopefully you can work through that and make it all, like smooth it over, and by the end of it, you can agree to disagree if that's the case, or maybe something that you've said is so thought-provoking that it causes someone to go and research what you're saying. But anyway, going to the Bible, we are looking at someone that many of you have probably heard before. His name is Paul, and it's actually like a little bit later on, kind of in his ministry, and maybe kind of mid-ministry when this happens, but I'm going to read this scripture to you. It's actually and I'm going to read off the screen because it's on here, but it's kind of broken up. It's in Acts 14, 19 and 20. It says this: "Then some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowd over. They stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city, thinking he was dead. But after the disciples had gathered around him, he got up and went back into the city." So Paul is one of the first missionaries of the United States, of the New Testament, and he traveled around sharing the faith of Jesus that he had found on the road to Damascus. It's a really cool story if you haven't read it. Paul actually used to persecute Christians. He helped people find Christians who followed Jesus. His name was actually Saul at the time, and he was on a road one time heading someplace to Damascus to help with this persecution type thing, and Jesus literally met him on that road and changed his life. Changed his name from Saul to Paul, and basically Paul's life was never the same. And instead of being the person who persecuted Christians, he was the one who was pointing them to Jesus. It's an incredible conversion story. And then we see Paul to go on to write so much of the New Testament, so much of what we know about our faith and about the churches of the New Testament is written through Paul and because of Paul. And so this was kind of in the middle of his faith. And what's crazy is it says there that Then some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium. Now, really quick, I just want to tell you that Antioch and Iconium, they were like earlier in Acts, because this is in Acts 14, but earlier in Acts, like Acts 14, 5 and 6, it was talking about how Paul was actually talking about Jesus in Iconium and Antioch, and all the people there were kind of rejecting him, and they were getting a little bit hostile towards him, so he left that city, and he traveled over 100 miles away. And it tells us, if you kind of read like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, if you kind of continue to read in Acts 14, that these Christians who were persecuting him, who were kind of like giving him some like grief over what he was saying, they traveled those 100 miles, the same distance to where Paul was. So they didn't just kind of like, say, you're terrible, we don't want to hear what you're saying, you're the worst, all this stuff. They didn't just say that. They actually got up, went the 100 miles to find him, grabbed him from the city, stoned him, literally took big stones, which is what they did in the New Testament, in the Old Testament. They stoned him until he had to be not moving because they thought he was dead. They dragged him out of the city, basically like put him on the outside of the city and was like, you're nothing. It was like, one of the worst things that you could do is just kind of leave a dead body like out there and it, like not being taken care of properly. And so it like was a shameful thing like to Paul. They all thought he was dead. They traveled 100 miles, told him, you're dumb, literally stoned him, what they thought was to death, and then left him. Christians in the town that he was in came back and surrounded him, realized that he was still alive, helped Paul get up, and he walked back into the city. I can only imagine, like, the grit, the strength, the tenacity it would take after you had literally been stoned to walk back into the same city, into the same crowd of people who literally were despising you. So much that they wished death upon you and caused it, what they thought caused it to happen. This is the ultimate persecution. Now, I hope no one in this room, now, I don't know if you know this, my dad is like really, you don't know this, but my dad is really into like knowing what's happening in the Christian world around the world. And so when I was young, he would always like tell me stories of people who came to know Jesus in other countries, in China and the Middle East, like all these places, and where people would be persecuted very similar to this, like not very long ago, and honestly, it's still happening to this day. Now, we in the United States probably don't have, there's probably no fear of this happening to us, where we would literally be taken out and be stoned. But I will say that this is happening around the world, and that Christians are being persecuted for what they believe. Now, it kind of puts into perspective, I think, for us, like when we're persecuted, when someone fights back with us about something that we've said, or they don't agree with us, it feels a little bit like, well, it's really not that good. It doesn't feel as weighty as being stoned to death, but it still hurts. And it still causes us to kind of gasp and catch our breath and kind of feel maybe sorry for ourselves, to feel upset that someone doesn't see our side, I can see and know and have felt where walked away from a conversation feeling just so feeling in despair over not being able, what I felt like was to communicate Jesus and his love and forgiveness and his hope properly, or in a way that the person I was talking to would understand it. And so when we think about our faith and we think about living for Jesus, and we think about what Paul went through to make sure that the gospel was still preached, that Jesus was still preached, it kind of puts into perspective us as we keep going in our faith and sharing our faith. Paul, after this happened to him, he didn't stop preaching the gospel. He continued. He continued to preach, he continued to share, he continued to tell people how Jesus had literally transformed his life and met him on the road to Damascus. He didn't stop, and he kept telling God, give me words to say to the people of Ephesus and Corinth and Thessalonica, all of these places that we can literally read about in the Bible. God was speaking to Paul, and Paul continued to share his faith because he knew that if he couldn't share his faith, he would rather be dead. Now, that is some loyalty. It's straight, craziness. But he knew that if he couldn't do that, then he would rather be dead. So, my question for us tonight is this: is your faith strong enough to endure rejection? Is the faith that you have, if you're a Christian in this room, is it strong enough to endure rejection? We talk about this a lot as people who work at Hope and work on staff here, is that us, Christian people, that we don't really ever get to see 80 to 90% of what God is doing. It's so cool when we get to share wins. We do this often at every staff meeting I'm in, our student staff meeting, our Frisco East staff meeting, even our all staffs, when everybody comes and we're all here together, we share wins and we say, does anyone have a win? And that win is always based on something that we know that God has done in someone's life. It always is. And how God is using small group leaders or students. I'm sure that we've shared about some of you in this room and the friends that you're bringing and the transformation that you've seen in their lives. I know that we have. And we get to share those wins, but what's crazy is what we talk about is even though we're sharing 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 wins, there's probably 20 to 30 that we don't see that God is doing, that we don't necessarily have the perspective to see it on, but we have to know and we have to trust that he's at work, and that when we're sharing who he is with those around us, that he's at work even when we don't see it happening. There's a verse in the Bible that says, some seeds are planted, and some people water those seeds, some people they plant those seeds, some people harvest those seeds, but hardly ever does one person get to do all of those things. Usually it's one person kind of does one and then another and then another. And so sometimes we get to be the one that harvests, and we get to be the one that helps lead someone to the Lord, or sometimes we're the one that just plants the seed. And we walk away from the conversation feeling like we actually haven't done anything, and maybe even made God and Jesus look worse, But when we put into perspective this big God that we serve, and that he actually uses us, and sometimes it feels like in big ways and sometimes it feels like in small ways, when he uses us, it's maybe not always the way that we feel like we should be used or think that we should be used. But that our faithfulness to him, our obedience to our calling, our obedience, like Paul kept talking about who Jesus was in his life, when we continue to do that and we don't let that is our comeback story. When we don't let all of the hard things and the persecution detour us from making Jesus the main thing and continuing to share him, that is our comeback story. That is our rally moment. I gotta check the time. Ooh. So, after Paul left Derbe, he went to Lystra. And there, this is in Acts 16, there was a disciple named Timothy. His mother was Jewish and a believer, but whose father was Greek. The believers in Lystra and Iconium spoke well of him. Basically talking about how, Paul, he's walked the walk and he's talking the talk, and man, he was literally stoned, but look where he is now. Timothy was the Timothy, and if you don't know anything about Timothy, there was Paul and Barnabas and Timothy was the teenage version of Paul and Barnabas, and they helped guide him, lead him, direct him, and Timothy became a really big name in the Christian faith in the New Testament too. And if Paul had given up, Timothy wouldn't be Timothy. Paul wouldn't have written all of these letters that are so encouraging to us today as we read our Bible. So there's a verse in the Bible that says, do not grow weary in doing good. When due time, you will reap a harvest. And I want to say that to y'all, that don't grow weary in doing good and living for Jesus. Because one day, you're going to see this harvest come into your life. And it's going to be incredible. Would you pray with me? God, thank you for every person in this room. God, I know that we never know what our obedience will bring. We never know the difference that we can make if we just stop and we give up. And when persecution hits us and when people make fun of us or don't understand or they literally turn their backs on us because of what we believe, we never know what you're doing in their life. And we know, God, I know this, and it's scattered throughout your word, that a faith that can't be tested can't be trusted. And I believe that, and I know that. And so, God, I pray when the testing of our faith comes, like it says in James 2, that it would only make our faith grow. And I pray that for every person in this room. I pray, God, that throughout their life, their faith would only grow higher and higher and higher and become more and more and more, and that they would trust you, students in this room, that leaders, that all of us would trust you like we've never trusted you before, because, God, when we get back up with your help, we see you do miraculous things, and, God, we want to see you do that throughout our entire life. So, God, we love you. We need you. We can't do this without you. In your name. Amen. Amen, amen. So glad y'all are here today. I got to break you up really quick because I am late to get back.